Alright, hello everybody. I know this isn't, I would like to point out this isn't one of my weekly updates because that's not until Thursday. This is basically a blog to answer some emails that I have received where people are just kind of interested in my backstory or my personal life up until this point. And so I think I'm going to have to do this in two parts. First part, I was a tiny little tomboy up until the age of 8. I was about the size of a stick. And at the age of 8, my parents decided that they were going to get divorced, which, was justified because my father was cheating on my mother many, many times, and she had just had enough. My parents were divorced, and my mother quickly remarried. Now, to a child, it seemed like it was only a matter of weeks, but it could have been longer. What I know is that my parents did divorce when I was 8, and my mother was already remarried, and I was still 8 years old. My first father was in the Navy, and my stepfather was also in the Navy. So I do come from a military background. I have 4 other siblings. We were immediately shipped to my stepfather's new for his next 6-year term residence, which was Hawaii. Now, I know that may seem like a really cool thing to have happen to you, but when you're a child, Hawaii is a totally different place. It's more geared towards adults, or at least it used to be when I lived there. So I can't tell you how many times I've climbed Diamond Head because that's the only thing we could do. But the zoo was cool. The zoo and the aquarium were cool. Anyways, from the time of when we arrived when I was 8 years old until about the time I was 13 when I realized I was fat, I don't have very many memories, not really that would constitute a 5-year span. I have bits and bobbles here and there that I remember. I don't remember how I started to get fat. All I remember is waking up at 13 and realizing that I was fat. I know it sounds really strange, but, there it is. I can't do anything about it. That's what I remember. My awareness may have come around due to the fact that, 13 prepubescent children getting ready to go into junior high school, things of that nature, they become more critical about how you look, and especially if you don't fit into what is considered the normality standards, and being fat, of course, is not considered normal. So I was a fat kid. I was made fun of, but again, it didn't really bother me. I'm not quite sure. I think I still lived under a tent of naiveness, basically, which I think kind of benefited me in a way because I was able to laugh at some of the things they said, which backfired on them because most of them decided that I wasn't worth making fun of if I wasn't going to react the way they wanted. So during intermediate school, I went to Aleimanu Intermediate. I had 5 friends, and they were the best friends I've ever had. I've never had friendships like theirs since. We were inseparable. They were all kind of outcasts too, for whatever reasons. I think I was really, I was the fat kid, and then there was like a fat boy, and then the rest of them were all kind of regular size, but for whatever reasons they weren't considered as part of the cliques or popular. But anyways, being military, of course, everybody starts to move and be relocated, and the group started to dwindle. 2 went before me. At the age of 8, they decided that she had had enough of me for whatever reason, and she shipped me off to go live with my father, whom I had not seen or spoken to since I was 8. I arrived in Washington State to begin my life with my father, and that's basically where everything started to take a very turbulent turn in my life. My father, I should point out, was a raging alcoholic. He would get up in the morning, start drinking, and he would not stop drinking until he passed out at night. that is a raging alcoholic. He would drink when he drove. I was actually taught how to pour his beers on the side so they wouldn't foam up while he was driving. So I would sit in the passenger seat and he would call me the bartender. Just after my 15th birthday, and I'm not sure if his attitude was an adverse reaction to the fact that he was always drunk or if he was just short-tempered. I had been putting up with physical abuse periodically, and I had also been putting up with verbal abuse basically on an everyday schedule. Most of the time, he liked to call me, and I'm going to swear here, so I'm warning you, he liked to call me fat bitch. He wouldn't call me by my name. It was just fat bitch. And he would use it sometimes as an enduring term, so which was quite confusing. But anyways, one day I had taken a shower and I left a wet towel on the bathroom floor, and he found it, and he just flew into, one of his manic rages. It was just horrible. I was physically abused. I was verbally lashed at. I had things thrown at me. And he went back out to the bar to go cool down, as he used to call it. And I made a decision. Now, before I go any farther, I would like to point out to anybody else who is watching this who might be in a similar situation. In the late 80s, we didn't have as many groups, and people weren't as aware or as willing to do things about children who are suffering at the hands of their parents. Nowadays we do. So I do not recommend what I did. I recommend that use what I did as the very least and last option for any type of solving of the problem. Anyways, back to the story. I got dressed and I left. I never came back. I felt it was more beneficial for me to live on the streets than it was to live in a home where I feared going to sleep, because if he came home and I had inadvertently left something out, or if something didn't look right, being dragged out of my bed at night and beaten or yelled at, or both. So I became a Rose Square, Portland City child, and I stayed that way for a couple months. Now, I had been fat when I went to the streets, and living on the streets for a couple months quickly thins you down. I did become thin. I became a size 4, I think I was 4 or 5, until a very nice couple took pity on me and took me into the home and fed me and kept me warm, and got in contact with my mother, who had scheduled to come pick me up in a couple months when my stepfather's term in Hawaii was done and they were on their way to the next location. And that's what happened. It's hard to say, but I think, the fact that I had been so independent for such a long time, and then being forced back into a child with parents who tell you what you can and can't do, was very hard for me. I'm not saying I was a rosy child. I was not. I was quite defiant. Now, I wasn't defiant about everything. My major issue was that if I wanted to stay out at 10 or 11 at night, then I should have been allowed to do so. I had kept myself alive for months and months on my own. I felt that I knew what was best for me and that I could handle it. So that did cause quite a few arguments. I did sneak out of the house a couple times. I wasn't, I'm honest about it. I wasn't a rosy child. Basically, that destructive behavior ended up causing me to become pregnant. I issued a child right before I was 17. I ended up marrying the father of the child. I chunked up with that pregnancy, and I ended up having another child just shortly into my 18th year, and which I chunked up again. My highest point in that relationship was a American size 28, which is rather large, and I would like to say I'm not poking fun at anybody or belittling anyone who is 28 or larger, but it is a large size, and I'm here to be honest, and of course my whole major thing about doing this is losing weight. So honestly, 28 was a very large size. After that relationship, I went back to college, and because of my erratic schedules, I quickly went back down to size 8, size 10, and fell into relationship number 2. Now, number 2 relationship, he seemed like a really nice person on the go-get. You know, he was very nice, very attentive, and things of that nature. But it took me a while to figure out what was going on behind the scenes and behind my back. Basically, he presented himself as being a businessman, and the reason that, you know, he never really had money to splash out was because all his stuff was tied up in assets. And I have a tendency to take everybody at face value until I'm proven wrong. So I'll believe anything you say, basically, is what it comes down to, until I can prove otherwise. Even though there was like this little voice in the back of my head, you know, just throwing up these red flags, I went along with it, went along with him, everything he had to say. Anyways, his lack of wanting to have a real job and his gift, I guess you can call it, for being a talker, landed him in trouble several times, which included prison stints, a couple years every time. So, yeah, he ended up in prison for defrauding people. And it was one of these last times that he was in prison, when I was still with him, that I realized how bad of a person he was. And like I said, I had that little voice in the back of my head, but I never really did anything about it. And what happened is a letter was sent to my house from my husband, but to my mom. And whether people agree with this or not, I felt justified in opening it and reading it, and I did. And basically, it was full of lies upon lies, or over-exaggerated events, or actual things that were actually his doing that he was turning around and blaming on me. And it was to my mom, and there was a couple of remarks in there that made me very aware that she must have been saying things about me too. So I immediately went over to confront her about this, and she basically told me that yes, they had been corresponding, and basically saying that yes, she believes what he had to say about me. She didn't think I was a good person, that I shouldn't be so horrible to him, that he's doing time because of me, because basically he said he had to do this